Welcome to Clarity, a podcast powered by the Thomson Reuters Institute. I'm Zach Warren, the Institute's Legal Insights and Strategy Lead. In each episode, we dive deep into a single question from decision makers and thought leaders from legal, corporate, tax accounting and audit, and government communities. In today's episode, we discuss the big question: how can law firms prepare for economic changes in 2026? The past decade plus has been categorized by strong economic performance for law firms, with rates consistently rising above inflation and revenues higher than ever in 2025. But as we enter the new year, we see a legal sphere that is becoming a bit more unstable. Political instability, regulatory upheaval, and economic uncertainty have generated extraordinary legal demand, but that same turbulence is creating widening gaps between firms experiencing spectacular growth and those struggling to keep pace. Corporate insourcing and the rise of AI technologies also brings into question what the economic models of the future will look like. Even if the bottom line is looking strong, it's never too early to begin planning for these tectonic shifts. Following the release of the 2026 State of the Legal Market report, Mike Abbott, the head of the Thomson Reuters Institute, speaks with Raghu Ramanathan, Thomson Reuters president of the legal professionals business, about what lies ahead for the legal industry in 2026 and beyond.
Hi everyone, I'm Mike Abbott, head of the Thomson Reuters Institute. I want to thank you for joining this week's episode of Clarity, the Thomson Reuters Institute podcast. We are fortunate to have Raghu Ramanathan joining us today. Raghu is the president of the legal professionals business for Thomson Reuters. Raghu, welcome. Good to see you again.
Thank you, Mike. Always happy to be here.
Listen, I want to jump right into this because as we look at 26 and look back on 2025, it's a pretty amazing story to tell. I mean, if you think about, I understand too that when there is sort of chaos and instability and everything else, that can be good for law firm demand, right? But when you look back on 25 and we look at the political instability, regulatory upheaval, economic uncertainty, I mean, it was a recipe for disaster for the legal industry. But instead, what we came out the other end with was a pretty remarkable story. And I realized that for some law firms, that was very, very strong performance. I would say most law firms, that was very, very strong performance. And others probably were more pressures on them as a result of those changes. But overall, a pretty remarkable story. I mean, if you look at demand on the year, it grew a little better than 2%. That's versus an historical average of about 0.6%. We look at the highest quarter was 3.9%. So I think it was going back, if I'm not mistaken, to 2010. We've been growing at about 0.6%. And that's across, hundreds of law firms that are part of our financial insights businesses where we get that data. Rates continue to be a strong story, 7.4% growth over 2024. Realization strong, double-digit growth for most large law firms. Tech spend is on the rise. Headcount is on the rise. We'll talk more about that. But again, what could have been a recipe for disaster turned into a pretty amazing story. And I want to dive into that with you. One of the things I always look forward to when we have this annual State of the Legal Market report that we're going to talk about today is the story that the team pulls together and sort of the metaphor that they create. And I always look forward to it. And I will not do this justice, but this year's report is around the formation of the Himalayas, tectonic forces creating both unprecedented peaks and also the potential for some pretty deep valleys. And they compare this to the potential of what's happening or what's facing the legal industry. For you, and to start out with this, I'd really like to know, how are firms really supposed to navigate this period of uncertainty when that seems to be more and more the norm? I mean, you look back over the last handful of years, and that's been the case, but they continue to plow forward. But is that sort of navigation sustainable?
Yeah, so Mike, your team has excelled themselves with the metaphor. I really like it. So maybe let's spend a minute on what do we mean by this tectonic shift in my perspective. The industry has definitely hit new peaks from a revenue and a rates perspective, driven by structural factors driving demand, which you can label as one tectonic shift. But there's a second tectonic shift underway with technology, which is, in my view, not yet fully manifested, which is about AI, including Gen AI. Automation of significant parts of the legal workflow is inevitable and are expected to have, in some ways, a reverse effect on rates, the reverse effect of the first tectonic shift in some ways, right? And rates will come down, it's inevitable. However, this also has the potential to unlock demand. So if you look at the industry in terms of profits, both tectonic shifts might, in the end up pulling in the same direction and might result in new peaks from a profit perspective, right? And to your question about firms needing to be prepared, this is a very, very crucial period. They need to better understand the nature of both tectonic shifts and prepare to change the business model to benefit from it.
No, I think that's exactly right. I'm going to touch on a couple of those things in a bit with you, because I think there's some areas where they're set up to do that extraordinarily well, and some other areas where they might need to pay a little closer attention to things. One of the things that we saw in 2025 that was pretty unusual was that both transactional and countercyclical practices were growing at the same time, right? Countercyclical, obviously, that's where we see the activity during times of uncertainty and upheaval and change and so forth. But both of those sort of came back at the same time. And I'm just kind of curious, and this is maybe an unfair question to you too, but is that where we are, or what story does that tell us in terms of where we are when you've got both of these kind of firing at the same time?
Yeah, it's very unusual, isn't it? And it's a really good question. All I can do is speculate, and I have my hypothesis. It has been an incredibly disruptive year for the market. We know it, right? And the reason is we are dealing with several new paradigms on how the world economy works. We're going from a global economy to a bunch of more protectionist local economies, from an integrated supply chain to a more fragmented supply chain with less visibility, right? From open to restrictive labor markets and big shifts in societal priorities. So there's a lot happening here. So my hypothesis is it's telling us two things. Firstly, all this has caused severe disruptions to our clients and hence the increase in countercyclical work. But secondly, these structural changes are not one time, right? They are going to persist. They're ongoing. And there's uncertainty over the magnitude and the timing of how they will manifest themselves. So clients are worried about how to prepare for these changes more proactively. And this is creating the higher demand for more planned transactional work as well. Anyway, that's a lot of theory, but that's my hypothesis.
No, I think it makes sense. Kind of sticking with this demand story, our data shows that the AmLaw 100 firms the work to AmLaw 100 firms is sort of slowing a bit from what the historic pace has been. And what we're seeing is more clients are pushing work down market. And that's because the corporate legal departments are facing their own cost pressures and so forth. And some of this could be attributed to rate growth as well. Is this a fundamental kind of restructuring, or is this sort of, hey, this is the moment in time and this is what's been happening? And I realize it's been happening for 18 months to 2 years now, but is that where we are, or is it a blip?
Yeah, it's clear that mid-law firms are doing well, right? But also, I want to state that AmLaw 100 firms are also doing well. There are a lot of big strategic questions clients are grappling with, as we just discussed, and AmLaw 100 firms are charging increasing rates for these strategic and critical work, and they are doing fine. However, what you're pointing out is the trend we are seeing is that in a budget-constrained environment, clients are definitely shifting more routine, standard work to smaller firms. While budget pressure certainly plays a role, the sustained nature of the flow could suggest a more fundamental restructuring, as you point out, with companies increasingly valuing cost efficiency and specialized expertise, narrow expertise from smaller firms, without the premium associated with the AmLaw 100 branding. So in a way, you could say clients are prioritizing value and matter fit over marquee brands, and mid-sized firms which are combining technology and expertise with sharper pricing are increasingly becoming the first port of call for such work.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. We talk a lot about the need for business model and pricing model change sort of in the age of AI here. And we put the onus on the law firms to think about this. But what we may be seeing in part too is some of this change is starting to happen, and they're going to have to get on board with this. I mean, one of the interesting things, I've had more than a few conversations with AmLaw 50 firms about this topic, about work moving down market and into the second hundred or into mid-sized firms. And not in any kind of arrogant way, but most of them have said, I know this is happening. I'm not challenging that or discounting it. But right now, I think that maybe mid-size AmLaw second hundred are realizing the benefit of that move more than we're feeling the pain of it, because some of that goes unnoticed. And I don't know if that's because of all of the other things we talked about in terms of rate growth and demand growth and all of that, where it just doesn't feel the same, or if it's the nature of work or what
Yeah.
it is. But it's just kind
And
of,
that is exactly right, Mike, right? I think, like we said, the bigger firms are not feeling the pain because they're getting a lot of higher value strategic work. So as of now, it hasn't hurt them.
yeah. I want to shift gears a little bit to technology spend. I think the percentage growth, if I'm not mistaken, was 11.7% that we saw in 2025, and for all of the obvious reasons where those investments have to happen. But where do you think firms go from here? I mean, is that level of spend sustainable, or those one-time spends until they kind of, change their infrastructure? What happens next? And do they leverage the technology that they have? Because historically, that hasn't been the case necessarily.
Yeah. I think with AI, I think firms are essentially going to have to choose between two directions. Either they go for very, very complex work, which is less touched by technology, or they go for, you could say, the routine work where it'll be increasingly taken over by technology. I even use the analogy, Mike, that for some legal services, law firms will have to think about technology as the service provider and lawyers as quality control, right? Funny concept coming from manufacturing, but something to think about, right? So my view is that the growth in technology will be sustained, especially by the law firms who shift towards technology-centric service models and not the very, very high-end work. That is inevitable. That's bound to happen. Now, on the other hand, I also want to say that technology is not a panacea for everything. More and more, my view is technology is not the bottleneck, but it's the absorption of the technology that is the bottleneck. I see different law firms absorbing and incorporating technology in very, very different ways, some more successful, some less successful. So there will be more attention and spend going into the use of technology, not just buying technology.
I think that's exactly right. And when we look back on the Future Professionals report from 2025, a couple of the data points there were, hey, adoption is increasing, but it's not increasing as quickly in law firms as it is among the corporate legal counsel space. But the other is, I can't, and I'm not going to try to pretend I know the percentages, but the vast majority said, hey, we know that these technologies are going to bring transformational change to not only to our firm, but to the industry. But we think for our firm, it's not going to happen this year, right? So there is that sort of that runway is long. Yeah, kind of along with the technology spend goes hand in hand, talent, right? And so at 11.7 or just shy of 12% growth in technology spend, we're also seeing about 8% growth in direct expenses, which is largely timekeeper compensation. At a time when most industries are saying we're going to be cutting back on headcount and leveraging the technology, the legal industry seems to be going in a different direction. How do you read that? Is that short term? Is it they're still trying to figure it out? Where are we?
Yeah. No, I see this as, if I can break it down, short term, medium term, long term picture, right? In the short term, what's happening is, we know, we've spoken about it, the demand is going up, right? But however, AI and technology is not fully incorporated into the standard workflows and operations of most law firms. Therefore, the only solution is to increase people, right? So that's what's happening right now. That's why people are still hiring more people to face off to the increasing demand. In the medium term, however, I think there will be a shift. We do expect law firms to incorporate AI into their workflows more effectively. At this point, say 18, 24 months from now, we expect that the nature of hiring will inevitably change, both in quantity, which will reduce, and also quality towards lawyers who are technically and mentally more suited to work with AI and can excel in unstructured problem solving. And over the longer term, I expect that the AI driven workflows will start having a ripple effect on pricing, which in a curious way will unlock more demand and might start to once more increase the demand for lawyers, right? So I think it's going to be like a wave, right? There's going to be a hiring wave right now to meet the demand, then a dampening when AI kicks in, and then a once more an increase in the wave when people are getting high quality, better priced, value for money legal work because of technology.
Yeah. Let me ask you. I want talk about midsize a little bit because when we think about that, and you think about mobile demand, right, and work moving more into the midsize space, that's great news for them. But historically, like we talked about generally with the 8% growth, uh, they've overhired, right, and that hasn't worked out for us. So they've had years of being kind of squeezed from a competitive perspective, right, and profitability perspective. But now things have opened up for them when they're seeing this more work come in. How do they avoid that sort of historical cycle of, all right, now we've overcooked it and now we're being squeezed again? Is it the same situation as you're talking about in kind of the large space, or is it different?
Yeah, for the mid-sized law firms, I think it is an extremely critical strategic point in time, even more than large law firms. The reason is, and Mike, you know some of the forecasts I've made, right? I foresee a severe period of industry consolidation. And the main difference is nothing to do with size. It has got to do with who's ahead in technology and who's ahead in shifting the business models in line with where technology is going, right? And that is a critical period for mid-sized firms because firms who get it right will absolutely increase their market share and they will be double, triple their size. Firms who don't get it right, and by the way, I'm seeing a group of leaders and laggards emerge, and those who are in the laggards group are in serious risk of being just swallowed up, right? So I think this is a even more existential, but at the same time, a big opportunity for mid-sized law firms.
No, I agree. One of the things that we hear about year after year after year is hourly billing, right? And our data shows us in the report that 90% of legal work is still billed hourly. Now, you can challenge that and you can say, okay, because we've talked to other law firms and you have too, it said it's not 90%, it's 60% for us or whatever. So you're going to have segment and sub-segment differences. Again, the data we're looking at is AmLaw 100, Second 100, and midsize. And that's the driver. And I do know that there's some hourly billing that has a twist to it, and it could be looked as alternative instead of straight hourly. But it feels like both from a law firm perspective and a client perspective, both is waiting for the other to make the first move as it relates to hourly billing. How does that standoff end? And I hate to call it a standoff, but how does that end? Like, who's the first one to make a move and really reshape this?
Yeah, sounds like a Western. So the my view is it is not a standoff. I think law firms have not been reading the room right, and they do not understand the deep peril that they face. I've spoken to several general counsels that are increasingly frustrated at law firms over their approach to AI, not incorporating it enough, not passing on enough of the value, and changing the way they charge for the service. Just as an anecdote, right? I was with one recently, and the person said, it's a budget season, right, Mike? I'm preparing for next year's budget, sitting down with my CFO, CEO. I fought hard to get 2 to 3% increase in budget for my in-house legal team next year. And then just as I successfully concluded those negotiations, right, my panel law firms come to me and say the rates next year will be up by 8%, right? And it leaves me deeply frustrated. So I think some of these GCs I've spoken to are taking some measures. They've started talking with alternative AI-based startups and legal service providers. Admittedly, it's early stage, but they're exploring what other options they have if the legal industry does not respond to what they need, right? So, in my view, it is no longer a standoff, right? It's going to be a trend. Demand is going to shift, and I do believe the law firms are right now doing okay because of the market and the demand, but very, very soon they'll be in a very critical situation on how they can respond to this.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And it's sort of what we were talking about with business model and pricing model changes. It could be that all that's happening around them will sort of facilitate some of that change on its own, right? You talk about the kind of the
And Mike, that I did want to say, right? And I think once law firms start seeing demand moving away, especially to these alternative service providers, that is when they will shift their pricing model. There won't be a choice.
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly right. You mentioned sort of the perceived disconnect between clients and the law firms and the GC conversations you've had. It's kind of interesting when we came out of the financial crisis. There was absolutely a disconnect, and we felt like 2 years talking about bringing GCs and law firm leaders together and having that discussion around each other's expectations and how they work together going forward. I feel like maybe it's just me, but post pandemic, we came out of that in a very different place, in a much healthier spot, right? Everybody was navigating the same uncertainty at the same time and figuring it out together. Since then, and I'd say over the last 2 years with AI and Gen AI, we've started to see that separation again, right? So you've got GC sentiment at a low, like as low as it's been post pandemic, right? But law firms posting historic profits. And how do you reconcile those two things? And I mean, you kind of touched on it a minute ago, but how does that come together?
Yeah, it's a very good observation, right? And I think the parallel to the pandemic, or perhaps even the 2008 economic crisis, is quite apt. Because what's happening, and you know this as well, right? So all large corporates are now looking at AI and how they can optimize the sales force, the frontline people, but also the backline people, right? Like the legal teams. Legal teams under enormous pressure like they've never been before, right? And that's why the sense of disconnect is very deep. I do think the market will shift, the balance of power will shift more towards general counsels in the next couple of years. I think some of them will start voting with their money in terms of the type of services and how much they will pay for and who's able to provide it to them. I think that will cause the change, right? And I think law firms will wake up and realize that they need to change. They need to be more strategic and transformational partners to their clients. They're not just transactional partners, right? I see a lot of sophisticated law firms already picking up on this theme, going to the law firms and saying, hey, how do we transform your work together, right? And kind of in a sense of partnership, consulting. And this is starting to reap rewards in certain relationships. I think that's what's going to happen in a more intense way in the next couple of years.
I'm glad you brought that up because that the report, this year's report, states that the firms that are going to be the most successful are the ones that have taken advantage of what they experienced in 25 and our experience in 26, and use that time to kind of reinforce their footing in the industry, right? Versus admiring the view and taking victory laps and being happy and comfortable with all of this. You started to touch on it, but what does reinforcing their footing look like to you? And I think, again, you mentioned a couple of specific examples there.
Yeah. So, how do you reinforce the footing as a law firm, right? First of all, we need to understand generative AI is not just another trend, right? It's already there. It's poised to become the most influential force shaping law firms in the next few years. But the most important thing is access to technology, as we discussed, does not automatically mean value creation. So the first thing I say, if you want to reinforce the footing, is that law firms must re-engineer the workflows and integrate AI into the core processes, right, as more standard workflows. This is what will drive strategic value. The second aspect, I would say, of reinforcing the footing is you need to rethink certain aspects of what you do day to day, how you're structured as a law firm, like your pricing model. Like what type of lawyers do you want to hire with what profiles? How to embed and reward tech talent. I think all of this re-engineering needs to happen. And the third part I would say is be prepared for new business models, right? Start experimenting with new business models. Like, for example, one of the customers we've been working with is putting forward a subscription-based, AI-driven legal service, right? Very, very innovative, interesting. It provides a repeat business in an area where they did not have any a lot of business before, right? So I think those would be my three main recommendations, right? Integrate AI into your workflows, rethink aspects of your operating model, and third, start experimenting with new business ideas and new business models.
I love it. I'm going to wrap this up with you with one final question. If you have one piece of advice to give to a law firm leader, and it can't be prepared, that can't be your piece of advice, what would it be?
Yeah, so I think law firms say it, most recognize it. I don't know how deeply they feel it, but they are at a crossroad. While the boom in demand and rates are intrinsic and reflect a stronger demand for top-notch legal services, they should not be complacent because deeper changes to legal services triggered by technology is already here. I'm seeing, as I said before, Mike, clear group of leaders and laggards emerge, right? Both in terms of AI adoption and re-engineering the law firm model. My simple advice would be make sure that you are in the pack of leaders, as I definitely expect rapid consolidation of the very historically highly fragmented legal industry, and there's no reason to be so fragmented. And so if you are in the leader, that's great, right? You will be the person benefiting, consolidating, and picking up market share.
Sound advice. Raghu, I always enjoy the conversation. Thank you very much for your time today. Thank you all for tuning in to the podcast. If you haven't done so already, please do download the 2026 State of the Legal Market Report. You can find that on the Thomson Reuters Institute.com site. Again, a big thank you, and here's to a very successful 2026 for everyone. Thanks again.
It's a pleasure, Mike. Thank you.
Thank you to Raghu and Mike for joining us. We may not know the ultimate outcome, but it's increasingly clear that change in some form is here for legal. I love the sentiment that firms need to reinforce their footing entering 2026. And while firms continue double-digit investment growth in technology, that's just one piece of the overall equation. As we go further into the new year, firms will need to find ways to articulate their overall value for clients. And that means having an adaptable strategy that can keep pace with the change. Thank you as always for joining us for Clarity, powered by the Thomson Reuters Institute. You can follow or subscribe to this podcast on your favorite podcast platform, and don't forget to share with your colleagues and leave a 5-star review or positive review on YouTube. For more data-driven analysis of today's professional services market and in-depth conversations with industry thought leaders, please visit us online at thomsonreuters.com/institute and follow us on LinkedIn under the Thomson Reuters Institute. Clarity is a production of Thomson Reuters, copyright Thomson Reuters 2026.